Hello and welcome to this talk on how the new directory for catechesis and other catechetical documents can inspire and organize and renew our ministry as catechists and catechetical leaders. My name is Joseph White. I'm a clinical child and family psychologist and also director of catechetical resources for our Sunday Visitor. Coming to you from my home in Austin, Texas. It's great to be with you for this session. As we get into this talk, there are a couple of things that I'd like to share with you at the outset here. Here are the things that we're going to be covering today. We're going to go into a brief history of the document that will also connect this with some of the other key catechetical documents that have come out in recent decades. We'll talk about the organization of the new directory. How is it structured? What are the major themes that this directory gives us? And then how do we apply that to what we do as catechists and catechetical leaders? You know, a directory, a general directory of catechesis is a guide from the universal church for how we're to hand on the faith. So this is a major document that we certainly want to pay lots of attention to and apply to the work that we do as catechists. Just a little background here to start with. The first general catechetical directory was published in 1971, and this came right out of the Second Vatican Council. It wasn't a council document, but it came from that work in the Second Vatican Council. It was written to, and I quote, to provide the basic principles of pastoral theology by which pastoral action in the ministry of the word can be more fittingly directed and governed, including the correct way of understanding the nature and processes of catechesis and also the truths which are to be taught by it. Then later on, after some key events in catechesis, including the beautiful Apostolic Exhortation Catechesi Tradendae on catechesis in our time by St. Pope John Paul II, as well as the publication of the Catechism in 1993, certainly one of the very biggest events in catechesis in several centuries. Those things happened and the need was seen for a new general directory for catechesis. The GDC, which was published in 1997, capitalized on the themes of Catechesi Tradendae. It also affirmed the importance of catechesis of adults, discussed evangelization and enculturation of the faith, and listed 6 essential tasks of catechesis. So if you're familiar with the 6 tasks of catechesis, this is where it came from, that 1997 general directory. We'll talk in a few moments about how that list has been reformulated just a little bit, not much, but just a little bit in the new directory. And that brings us to the present directory for catechesis. Now, the history of this present document that just came out several weeks ago began in 2015. There was a plenary meeting of the newly established Pontifical Council for the promotion of the new evangelization. And the plenary meeting was about the relationship between catechesis and evangelization, and was held with representatives from all around the world. At that council meeting, it was noted that there had been several new developments in both the church and in contemporary society that had led to the need for a new directory. Lots of things have happened, and we'll talk about that as we go here, but the world has changed a lot, society has changed a lot. Even think about how much explosion there's been in digital technology and in other kinds of technologies, how much the landscape has changed in terms of secularism around the world and lots of other things. So with the input of a worldwide team of experts, a first draft of a new directory was written and discussed at the 2017 plenary meeting. So if you've heard for a while that a new directory was coming and you were thinking, when is this going to be out? this is why you heard so long ago, because it's been in the works for quite a few years now. The revised text was then sent to approximately 200 theologians and catechists and further elaborated and revised. In fact, I heard at one point that there had been 12 revisions before they got to the final draft. And that brings us to the finished document today, released in June 25th of 2020, and then released in English for the first time on July 2nd in the UK, and then on July 24th in the United States. The document has 12 chapters that are divided into 3 parts of 4 chapters each. Part 1 focuses on catechesis in the Church's mission of evangelization. Part 2 talks about the process of catechesis. And Part 3 focuses on catechesis in the particular churches. So let's take that first part first. This portion, catechesis in the Church's mission of evangelization, discusses the relationship between catechesis and evangelization and our missionary mandate, the Church's responsibility to go out and share the good news of Jesus Christ. Chapter 1 in this section is titled Revelation and its Transmission, and it gives an overall vision of evangelization and the role of the Church in the transmission of divine revelation. How do we hand on what God has revealed to us? Chapter 2 is titled The Identity of Catechesis, and this chapter focuses on the nature, process, goals, and sources of catechesis. One big theme in this chapter, and I'll come back to this when I talk about primary themes in a few minutes, is the Kerygma and its relationship to catechesis. Chapter 3 is titled The Catechist, and this chapter covers the identity and vocation of the catechist. It provides a description of various participants in catechesis and their unique roles. For example, bishops, priests, parents, lay catechists. What do all these people do in catechetical ministry? What is their role? And then chapter 4 is titled The Formation of Catechists. How do we prepare those who are going to hand on the faith to others? How must we form ourselves as catechists? And this chapter also talks about some various settings where that kind of formation might occur. Part 2 is titled The Process of Catechesis. And this part discusses how the faith is handed on, as well as the topics and settings where catechesis occurs. Chapter 5 is titled The Pedagogy of the Faith. And this chapter focuses on how God teaches us and how catechesis is a reflection of the divine pedagogy. Now, if you're familiar with my work at all, you might know that I wrote a book called The Way God Teaches, Catechesis and the Divine Pedagogy. So this is one of the things I really like to talk about. Our church documents for some time have referred to the idea that we should teach others in the same way that God teaches us. Here in this new directory, we have an expanded section on the pedagogy of God, and then how that applies to our work as catechists. And that section has shown me that in my prior work and writing on this, I got some things right, and now I guess I got some things wrong because the new directory overrules any work that I've done. But it's useful to look at this and reflect further and go deeper on how does God teach us, and then how does that lend itself to how we teach others. In chapter 6, this chapter is titled The Catechism of the Catholic Church. This chapter focuses on the content of the faith that's proclaimed in catechesis. How do those topics help us to form an identity as Catholics? And so this chapter obviously draws very heavily from the catechism, because the content that we proclaim in catechesis tends to all be in there in the catechism. And so how do we hand on those primary teachings of the church? Chapter 7 is titled Methodology in Catechesis. This chapter offers reflection on the variety of methods in catechesis. One of the points that this chapter makes is that there's no one particular catechetical method, but there's a variety of methods. And the methods that we use depend on a lot of different things, including the particular learners that we're sharing with, as well as the settings where catechesis is occurring, that sort of thing. This chapter talks about, among the different methods, the importance of human experience, the importance of memory, of language, the importance of the arts, lots of different ways that we hand on the faith. And you know, when I think about this section, my mind goes back to that section of the General Directory for Catechesis that talks about how the variety of methods that we use is a sign of life and richness. So we show that this message is living and rich by using lots of different kinds of methods to hand on the teachings of the faith. Chapter 8 is titled Catechesis in the Lives of Persons, and this chapter focuses on groups and individuals whose faith is being formed in catechesis. This highlights the role of parents as the first and most important teachers of the faith, and the family as domestic church. It also talks about the importance of growing in faith throughout our lives, and it gives a wonderful presentation age by age of the catechetical needs and how we might meet those needs according to each age group. I want to offer an aside here as a child and family psychologist who has spent a lot of time steeped in the research on human development and how that applies to our learning. They really had, you know, a good team putting this together who knew their human development, because what's written here is very sound from a scientific perspective and also from a theological one. And having those two things together, I think just makes this such a rich document. I especially like chapter 8. This is one of my favorite chapters. There are also other audiences discussed in chapter 8, including catechesis for persons with disabilities, catechesis of migrants and immigrants. So this chapter really is focusing on the recipients of catechesis, the people to whom catechesis is directed, and really prompts us to pay particular attention. And you'll see this throughout the directory. This is something that will come up that we'll talk about later as well, to pay particular attention to persons that might be on the margins, on the peripheries, people that sometimes get left out in our ministries. Part 3 is called Catechesis in the Particular Churches. And this portion of the document discusses specific challenges in the local church. Chapter 9 talks about the Christian community as participant in catechesis. There's a lot of emphasis in this directory on how the Christian community catechizes and forms us. And this chapter really centers on that theme. Talks about the importance of the ministry of the word. Talks about also the importance of various communities that carry out the mission of the ministry of the word, including dioceses, parishes, associations and movements, Catholic schools, lots of different communities and organizations that are responsible for that ministry of the word. Chapter 10 is titled Catechesis in the Face of Contemporary Cultural Scenarios. And this chapter really gets at some of the things that have changed, I think, in our culture since that second general directory, the GDC, in 1997. This chapter talks about cultural and social dimensions of catechesis amid new social and economic challenges, including religious pluralism. So we live in a pluralistic society, a society that includes people of many different religious persuasions, other non-Catholic Christians, as well as people of other religions, as well as people with no religion at all. And so how do we get by in a society like that? How do we live peacefully and respectfully with one another and still live out our faith? This chapter is getting at those kinds of questions, as well as talking about other current challenges, including bioethical issues, which these kinds of things are addressed from a couple of different sides. So, how can our faith, how can our catechesis inform us with regard to bioethical issues in terms of making sure that biomedical research, for example, promotes the common good in our society, and also ensuring that that the dignity of the human person is always respected, and all of that. That we pay the highest attention to the sanctity of human life. This chapter also talks about threats to the environment, migration, which of course is certainly a big phenomenon across the world right now, and also digital culture. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but there's a pretty expansive section on digital culture here in chapter 10. Also covered here is catechesis on Catholic social teaching. This is, of course, very important to Pope Francis, and something that connects with this topic of catechesis in the face of contemporary cultural scenarios. Chapter 11 is titled Catechesis at the Service of Enculturation of the Faith. And this chapter discusses reasons and recommendations for enculturation. So how do we enculturate the gospel message? How do we bring the gospel message to its fruition in various cultural contexts in ways that both preserve the integrity of the gospel message and also respect the culture in which it's transmitted, and respect the gifts that culture brings. This chapter also offers guidelines for the development of local catechisms as tools to foster enculturation. So when local catechisms are called for in a directory like this one, in a general directory, what that means usually is, at least first, that local conferences of bishops will develop catechisms and and also directories that then communicate the content that's in the general directory and the universal catechism. So when we talk about a local catechism or local directory, we're talking about like the United States Catholic Catechism for Adults. That would be our local catechism. And our local directory right now is the National Directory for Catechesis. My assumption would be that a new national directory will be coming at some point. It took 8 years beyond the GDC for the NDC, the National Directory for Catechesis, to be published, and so we probably shouldn't expect that right away. But my assumption is that will be in development, so we'll probably see an update to our national directory as well. Chapter 12 is titled The Organisms at the Service of Catechesis. This chapter talks about the roles of the structures that oversee catechesis. So what is the role of the Holy See, the Vatican, in catechesis? What is the role of conferences of bishops, of dioceses? That's where the focus is here in chapter 12. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the key themes in the new directory, the things that we see over and over in this document. And first, I want to point to encounter and accompaniment. Encounter is one of the most frequently used words in the new directory for catechesis. That shouldn't surprise you if you know Pope Francis, and if you read his writing or listened to his homilies, he uses that word a lot. Encounter appears nearly 60 times in the new directory for catechesis, and it's discussed in lots of different contexts: encounter with Jesus, encounter with Scripture, encounter with the world community around us, encounter with other people in the catechetical process. And I would say about that last point, that encounter with others in catechesis, that begins as encounter and then continues as accompaniment, that we're walking with those who we're forming in the catechetical process. Another key theme in the new directory is Kerygma. I alluded to this a little bit earlier when we talked about a chapter where this comes up. Kerygma is a word also that appears quite often in the new directory for catechesis. In the preface to the directory, it says this: we must not think that in catechesis, the Kerygma gives way to a supposedly more solid formation. Nothing is more solid, profound, secure, meaningful, and wisdom-filled than that initial proclamation. All Christian formation consists of entering more deeply into the Kerygma. So the Kerygma is that essential saving message of Jesus Christ that we find in the Gospels. And the new directory talks about both the initial proclamation of the Kerygma, because you can't really catechize somebody, you can't really form them in ongoing formation in the faith until you've evangelized, So, and let me put it this way, because I think this illustration fits. When we fall in love, we want to know everything about the person that we've fallen in love with, right? But when we're not in love, the little minutia of people's day, we couldn't care less, right? So when you're in love with somebody and you call them on the phone, you might ask questions like, what are you doing? How was your day? And we want to know all those little details. Why? Because we're in love. I think sometimes we make the mistake of teaching people a bunch of facts about the faith before they've fallen in love with Jesus and the church. And that's what Pope Francis and the writers of the new directory for catechesis are getting at with these points about the Kerygma. That we need to always make sure that we're evangelizing. We need to always make sure that we're bringing people to that love for Jesus and the church, or back to that first love for Jesus and the church. So both an initial and an ongoing proclamation of the Kerygma. The new directory echoes and expands on the 1997 GDC's point that catechesis is not simply a stage in the process of evangelization, but rather evangelization is an integral process of catechesis throughout the lifespan. We're all in need of continual evangelization. We have our on fire times, and we also have our lukewarm times, and we're all in need of that continual evangelization. We all need that continuous reminder of the core of the gospel message. And I'd point you to chapter 4 of another document, Christus Vivit, the Apostolic Exhortation to Youth, that Pope Francis wrote and released some time ago now. And in Christus Vivit, chapter 4, he really models for us how to proclaim the Kerygma to young people. He puts it really in their language. And that whole chapter is just beautiful. I think it's probably my favorite chapter in that document. But he sums it up this way in 3 sentences. God loves you, Christ saves you, and Christ is alive and wants you to be alive, right? Which is a beautiful summary of that message of the Kerygma. Another key theme in the new directory for catechesis is mystagogy. Mystagogy. The catechumenal inspiration of catechesis, the directory says, does not mean reproducing the catechumenate in a servile manner, but taking on its style and its formative dynamism, responding also to the need for a mystagogical renewal, one which would assume very different forms based on each educational community's discernment. So what does a mystagogical catechesis look like? What does a catechesis that takes its inspiration from the catechumenate look like? A few things, a few points that are made here in this directory and in the prior one that I think we should pay attention to. One is that a mystagogical catechesis has at its core the witness of the Christian community. The community is witnessing to and forming the person being catechized in the principles of the gospel. Secondly, immersion in the Paschal mystery, that in a mystagogical catechesis, we don't just hear about the Paschal mystery, but we're actually immersed in it, including through active participation in the sacraments, which all have as their core and as their center the Paschal mystery. And a developmentally responsive approach is also an element of mystagogical catechesis. Why? Because, God reveals himself to humanity in stages as people are ready to hear and accept the message. He also reveals himself to us in stages as we are able to accept and hear and to respond to the message. And we are called to reveal this message, to hand it on to others in stages as they are ready to hear and accept and respond to that message. We see that in very discrete stages in the catechumenate, in the RCIA process. We have those particular stages and those rites that punctuate those stages in that process. But we also, I think, can model that in the way that we are developmentally responsive in our catechesis, in the way that we look for particular windows of opportunity to then deliver just the right message at the right time as people are ready to hear and understand it at different ages and developmental levels. Another element of mystagogical catechesis is a catechesis of the senses, that, when we think about being immersed in the mystery and in mystagogy in the Catholic Church, we're thinking also of all of those sacramental signs. There are things that we can see and hear and smell and taste and touch in the sacraments, and mystagogical catechesis is a catechesis of the senses. It should be multisensory. There should be things we could do with our hands, things we can hear, things we can see. All of those become tools in our methodology. And the next key theme I'd like to talk about is dialogue with the arts and sciences. The Directory for Catechesis says, in the logic of the Incarnation, fidelity to God and fidelity to humanity are profoundly interrelated. It should be borne in mind, therefore, that the inspiration of faith itself assists in a correct evaluation of the contribution of the human sciences. So one of the points that the Directory makes in this section is that we should look to the human sciences like education and psychology for ways that we can continue to refine our methodology, to be responsive to what we know about how people think and how people grow and how people learn. That we should integrate what we learn from those sciences to make our catechesis as effective as possible. Then also, as we think about how we view the human person in our human sciences, our faith ought to inform that view as well. So, we should be able to look at the human sciences through the lens of our faith. So it's a two-way process. It's not a one-way process. It's a dialogue between our faith and the sciences. We also see this picked up quite profoundly with respect to dialogue between our faith and the arts. And here, I should mention something that I'm also mentioning in another talk today. The three transcendentals, the transcendental properties of being. Philosophers and theologians throughout history have pointed to three things that really point us toward the divine, that kind of help us to say, wow, there must be something bigger than me. There must be a God. And those things are truth, beauty, and goodness. Truth, beauty, and goodness. We live in a world today where people doubt that there is such thing as objective truth. You hear some people say, well, how could we know, what's true and what's objective truth? So people are skeptical of that concept. And so there might be times today in catechesis that we need to lead people in through the back door. We have two back doors as we lead people toward the truth, and those are beauty and goodness. When we see something beautiful in nature, or we see a beautiful work of art, it naturally just pulls at us. It lifts our heart up to the divine. When we see somebody who's truly good, who's full of virtue, who's giving of themselves out of love, and we can't explain it other than to say, they've just been given a lot of grace from God. They're doing this because they believe. And so those three transcendentals really become ways for us to reach people with the truth. The directory talks about the role of music and visual arts in both throughout history in catechesis as well as in modern catechesis, and also contributions that human sciences can make to catechesis as well. Another key theme in the new directory is cultural change and challenge. The directory talks about the role of catechesis and faith in bioethics. I alluded to that a little while earlier. Talks about some general issues related to the dignity of the human person. The directory talks about catechesis and environmental engagement and why that's so important at this point in human history. And then I mentioned earlier this expanded section on digital culture. This section is very interesting, and I encourage everybody to take a look at it. One of the things, even the presentation itself of the digital world and digital technology is interesting in the directory because it presents the digital world as a culture in and of itself, which I think is an interesting view, that technology is its own culture and its own world with its own language and its own rules for being and its own conventions. This section talks about a difference between digital natives and digital immigrants, meaning that people who were born before we had all of the modern technology we have today, and people who were kind of raised in the era of the internet and computers and smartphones and things like that, have different points of view. And sometimes might even struggle to communicate with each other, right? I mean, it's unfathomable to children today that I was born before the internet existed. I mean, I think they look at me and think it's amazing that you're still alive because you were born before the internet. Or that there was a time before the internet existed. I mean, I think one of the things they often ask is, what if you needed to know something? How would you be able to look something up or find out something new, right? Because the way they would do it is they would Google it. The relationship between digital natives and digital immigrants is discussed here, and with some particular concern towards how might we help one another, how might we accompany one another in this new landscape. This section also talks about the impact of the digital world and how we view ourselves and others. How does the digital world change our own view of ourselves and our own view of other people? This section talks about technology's potential for involving young people in pastoral initiatives and activities. So, it gives us a new tool for connecting young people. But along with the benefits that this section highlights, there are also risks and boundaries that this section talks about. So here we also read about the risk of addiction and isolation and gradual loss of contact with concrete reality as we immerse ourselves too much in virtual reality. This section calls us to proclaim the gospel in the language of new generations and to invite them to create a new sense of community that includes but isn't exhausted by what they find online. There's more to life than the virtual world, but we also can't ignore the virtual world. One of the things that this section says that I think is also interesting is that catechesis might achieve more personalization through technology, so it might be easier to customize catechesis through the modern technology we have today. But we also should be clear that catechesis shouldn't be individualistic, that the community catechizes us. This section calls all of us to be an evangelizing presence in the digital world today. And then finally, another key theme in the new directory is missionary discipleship. The directory says this in paragraph 50. Catechesis, moreover, forms believers for mission, accompanying them in the maturation of attitudes of faith and making them aware that they're missionary disciples called to participate actively in the proclamation of the gospel and to make the kingdom of God present in the world. So missionary discipleship certainly is a thread that runs throughout the directory. And here are a few different ways that it's discussed. In the context of the missionary role of the family as an agent of evangelization and catechesis. So the family as an agent of evangelization and catechesis. The importance of mission experiences for youth. The understanding of the pastoral care of youth as missionary outreach. And the necessity of proposing concrete missionary exercise of charity and witness in the world as an element of catechesis with adults. I want to just give you a couple of additional tidbits before we go into some really practical applications. So I'm going to do an exercise with you to practically apply some of the key themes that we find in the directory. But here are some tidbits. One of the things that I got asked about the most when I got a little sneak peek of the new directory, and it was difficult for me to answer this, was, what about the tasks of catechesis? Do we still have the same tasks? Well, yes and no. There are now 5 tasks of catechesis, so you might immediately be looking through these bullets and say, okay, what's missing? Nothing is quite missing, but this has been reformulated into 5 tasks. So what used to be promoting knowledge of the faith is now called leading to knowledge of the faith. This is reflecting the idea of accompaniment in catechesis, that accompaniment, of course, being a big theme of the ministry of Pope Francis. The second task, what we used to call liturgical catechesis, is now called initiating into the celebrating of the mystery, initiating into the celebrating of the mystery, reflecting that mystagogical catechesis. Third, forming for life in Christ. This is what we formerly called moral formation as a task of catechesis. Forming for life in Christ. This echoes the language of the Catechism, of course. And then the next task of catechesis, teaching prayer. That teaching to pray was one of the essential tasks of catechesis in the GDC as well. And then introduction to community life. So what we used to call education for community life in the prior directory. What's interesting about this one is that this talks about both building up the community and, as missionary disciples, contributing to the growth of community. So what used to be the 6 tasks of catechesis, missionary initiation, is now folded into this 5th task of catechesis here. We also, in this new directory, have 4 tasks of adult catechesis. This one is interesting too, and I can't wait to hear folks who work primarily in the area of adult catechesis unpack this. So here are our 4 tasks of adult catechesis: to elicit faith, to purify the faith, to nourish faith, and to assist the sharing and witness of faith. Some important points that are made about methodology in this new directory, and I've alluded to some of these already as we've talked about methodology, but the plurality of methods. There's no one method for handing on the faith. The importance, again, of human experience, but also the importance of memory in catechesis. The importance of language, including narrative language and the language of art. And the importance of the group and how the community catechizes. And then also, and I think this one is interesting, the importance of space. What do our catechetical spaces look like? One of the things you'll see in this new directory is that the directory is critical of catechetical spaces that look mostly like school classrooms, because catechesis is different in character in some particular ways than a school process. And so you'll see some encouragement here to be more intentional and thoughtful about the spaces in which catechesis occurs. So now what I'd like to do is offer you a couple of different dilemmas, a couple of different vignettes that I'd like you to brainstorm on and just consider how might I apply what I've heard already about the new directory, or if you've had a chance to read the new directory, how might I apply what I read there to some real scenarios that are faced by catechetical leaders, directors of religious education in parishes today. I have to also, as I go through this, credit a group of catechetical leaders who I met with earlier this year who helped me with some potential responses to these dilemmas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read each dilemma, and then I would ask you to pause the video and jot down some thoughts you have about how you might approach this. And then after you've done that, restart the video, and I will share with you some things that the catechetical leaders that I was working with on these dilemmas shared as ideas and suggestions. So here's the first one. Miguel is the director of religious education at an urban parish with 1,000 families, big program. He's concerned that the kids, teens, and even adults in the parish are not fully engaged in catechesis because they haven't yet had a life-changing encounter with the person of Jesus Christ. What are some things that Miguel can do to proclaim the Kerygma to the people he serves? Pause the video now. Take a moment to jot down some thoughts that you have about this dilemma. How might you approach this? And then restart the video, and I'll share with you what some other catechetical leaders said. And you can see where some of your ideas might have been similar, and maybe hopefully you'll get some ideas for some new strategies as well. Okay, so let's look now at what the catechetical leaders who helped me with these dilemmas said about dilemma A. Here's what they said. They might make use of small groups for this process of making sure that they're proclaiming the Kerygma, that they're evangelizing, make use of faith sharing. So, encouraging participants to share their faith and their spiritual journeys with one another. Having some events with speakers that are focusing on the theme of discipleship. What does that mean to be an intentional disciple of Jesus Christ? They encouraged Miguel to think about, how much time am I spending addressing the head and how much time am I spending addressing the heart? Both are very important, aren't they? Both are important. In fact, one of the things that Pope Francis says with reference to catechesis is head, heart, and hands, right? So we need to know our faith, we need to feel our faith, and then we need to go out and live our faith, head, heart, and hands. Next bullet, working people into the practice of prayer and highlighting the importance of prayer practices like adoration. This is certainly, a valuable and important way that we have that encounter with Jesus Christ. Gathering around food, mimicking a family experience. A lot of thought about letting the Christian community be the catechist here. Thinking about our language, the language that we're using, talking about our hunger, our thirst, our brokenness, to help people really feel that need for Jesus and for a relationship with God in their lives. Some additional responses. One of our catechetical leaders asked, how do we translate theological language into developmentally appropriate everyday language that connects with everyday life? And we need to make sure that we're doing that. Someone said, we're called not to be a sage on the stage, but a guide on the side, keeping in mind our responsibility to accompany others in this process. One person mentioned that there's sometimes a temptation to think I have to turn the parish around instead of focusing on one person at a time and making it more relational. And that's critically important if we're talking about evangelization. Another person talked about, again, prayer and encouraging prayer and making sure that we are praying ourselves. And then finally, somebody said much hinges on relationships between people and relationships between the person and Jesus Christ. Here's another dilemma. Veronica is the DRE at a parish with 750 families. She's recently seen an increase in the number of learners with autism, ADHD, and other diverse learning needs in her program. What can she do to make sure she meets these needs? Pause the video here, think about this scenario a little bit, and jot down some of your ideas and thoughts. Okay, now let's take a look at what the group of catechetical leaders that I worked with on these dilemmas said about dilemma B. one of the things they said is it's important to walk with and accompany the family of the person who is a diverse learner. And so, you know, we want to make sure that we're getting to know that family, that we're building trust with them, that we're listening to the family, because nobody is going to know, you know, if there's a child with diverse learning needs in the family, nobody's going to know the needs of that child better than the people that spend every day with that child and live with them. So instead of kind of saying, okay, here's what we can do for your child, I think what we need to begin with is, tell me a little bit about your child, you know, get to know the strengths and weaknesses, and get to know that family, and listen in all of that for how that family might meet the needs that are there as well. We need to think about, somebody said, our wording on registration forms and things like that. We want to make it very, very clear in black and white that we are open and eager to make reasonable accommodations for a variety of diverse learners, that we want everyone to be included, because that makes us Catholic. Catholic means for everyone, or universal, or containing the whole. We're not being very Catholic if we say, oh, well, we don't really have a class for that, you know, maybe check this parish across town. No, everyone who comes with us, who comes to us, is an important part of that community, and everyone has gifts to bring, and everyone has needs. You know, some needs might be more visible than others, but we all come with both gifts and needs. And if part of the community is missing, then we're missing out on those gifts that the person would bring. Exploring different options, looking outward, calling forth parishioners and professionals to meet some of those needs. I think the temptation sometimes, if we're including diverse learners in our catechetical groups, the temptation sometimes is to see if the parent will sit in with that child. And sometimes the parent is volunteering to do that because they're not sure that they trust that we're going to be equipped to meet those needs. However, I would encourage folks, because parents of children who have disabilities very often work so hard for that child in so many different arenas, and it can be exhausting. Those parents need a time to refresh and renew as well. Let the catechetical setting be one of those oases for these parents of kids with disabilities. See if you can call forth some professionals in your own community who would be equipped to work with the needs that these children bring, so that this parent can, for example, attend adult faith formation or just have a needed break. You know, I think this is so important, and it's something that we can do in our communities. Some other things: education for the parish, having some advocacy there, support for parents, some intentional outreach and invitation. Openness to sacramental preparation and celebration. One document that can really help a lot here that some people still are not aware of is called the Guidelines for the Celebration of the Sacraments for Persons with Disabilities. Guidelines for the Celebration of the Sacraments for Persons with Disabilities. And you can Google that and you'll find it on the U.S. Bishop's website. It's a collaborative document between the U.S. bishops and the National Catholic Partnership on Disability, which is a great resource as well. I would strongly refer you to that document to look for strategies and possibilities when it comes to preparing for and celebrating the sacraments with persons with disabilities. Excuse me. Another idea was a deanery or parish awareness day. Where we really promote awareness of persons with disabilities and their needs and also their gifts. The awareness that this is a pro-life issue. When we talk about respect for life and dignity of the human person, we're very much talking about respect for the dignity of persons with disabilities as well. And then finally, again, asking, what are the strengths? How can persons with disabilities use their gifts in our community? Last scenario for you. This one is about Lynn. Lynn works as Director of Faith Formation in a culturally diverse parish with a number of spiritual movements such as Christian Family Movement, Acts Retreats, as well as groups that come together for popular devotions, like a Divine Mercy group. How might Lynn begin to collaborate with these groups in order to strengthen catechesis at her parish? This is also a major theme that we find in the new directory. How might those different groups and apostolates, movements, be involved in catechesis and work more effectively with catechetical structures that exist? So take a moment, pause the video, take a moment to jot down some thoughts that you might have about this, and then we'll continue in a moment. Okay, let's take a look at what folks said about Dilemma C. One was that it takes time. Sometimes it takes a lot of time and communication and dialogue with different groups and movements to build that trust and to find ways to collaborate. We need to invest time into each group and person. We need to ask, what are the needs of the people in the parish and the groups in the parish? Make sure that we have some pastoral sensitivity, especially with different cultural ministries. Everyone should be welcomed. If a change is going to be made, it should be explained. I have talked with a number of folks in different apostolates and ministries where it just felt like the rug was pulled out from under them and they didn't really understand what happened. Our communication needs to be better than that. Affirm that each group has something to offer. Always seek common ground. Bring the cultures of the parish together to celebrate the patron of the parish. That's a great idea. Linking different movements and groups to the faith formation program in some way. For example, that Divine Mercy group we referred to in that scenario could pray for the confirmation candidates. This is a great idea too. Have a common experience. Have some family gatherings together. All right, in closing, I want to just offer you a few ideas for resources if you'd like to dive deeper into the new directory, and I certainly would encourage you to do that. One would be the directory for catechesis itself, of course. Get a copy of that directory and dive in, read that. There's some great stuff in there. I also have a brand new booklet called The Catechist Guide to the Directory for Catechesis. This is a magazine-style booklet that has information about some of the key themes in the directory, as well as some action steps for catechists, some questions for reflection, just various ways to kind of dive deeper into that document. This fall, there will be an event called Magnify that will happen between the months of September and December 2020. Where we'll have some days each month where we have key speakers covering every chapter of the new directory for catechesis and really taking a deep dive into that directory. This will be a national event that will be virtual, and I certainly encourage you to register for that. You can register on the NCCL website, nccl.org. Take advantage of that opportunity. And then also, I'd encourage you to follow me on social media for regular quotes and tidbits from the directory, as well as other things that I post related to new research that comes out in education or psychology that connects with what we do as catechists, or new catechetical statements that are coming from the Pope and other leaders in the church. I post a lot of those kinds of things on my Twitter account @JosephOSV. You can also connect with me on Facebook, and probably the easiest way to do that is to go to my website, sharingcatholicfaith.com, sharingcatholicfaith.com, and connect with me on Facebook there. Thank you for listening to this talk, for joining me for this. I've enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope that this was helpful for you, and may God bless you in your ministry.